The day I disappeared, I left behind a letter on the kitchen table. By the time my family finished reading it, it was already too late for them to fix what they had done to me. I am 72 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if you gave your family everything, they would never take anything from you. My name is Margaret Hale. I live in a quiet 2-story house at the end of Maple Grove Lane. A house my husband built with his own hands 43 years ago. Every wall in this place carries a memory. The kitchen still smells faintly of cinnamon and coffee in the mornings, just the way he liked it. The hallway floor creaks in the same spot it always has, right near the staircase, and I've learned to step around it out of habit, even when there's no one left to wake. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, the silence settled in slowly. Not all at once. It crept into the corners of the house, into the empty chair across from me at the table, into the long evenings where the clock ticks just a little too loudly. But I was never afraid of being alone, because I had my family. My son Daniel calls me every Sunday. Well, he used to. Back when routine still meant something. Back when I believed that love, once given, stayed where you placed it. Daniel is 42 now. Tall, steady, with his father's quiet eyes. When he was a boy, he used to run through this house barefoot, laughing, leaving fingerprints on every surface I had just cleaned. I never minded. Those little marks meant life. Now when he visits, he wipes his hands before touching anything. His wife, Sophia, usually walks in just behind him. She is always perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. The kind of woman who never raises her voice, but somehow still manages to say everything she needs to without warmth. She calls me Margaret. Always Margaret. Never Mom. At first, I told myself it was just a matter of time. Some people take longer to feel like family. So I welcomed her the only way I knew how, with patience, with kindness, with the quiet hope that one day, she would look at me not as an obligation, but as someone who belonged. For a while things seemed normal. We had dinners together, holidays, small conversations about work, about the weather, about nothing at all. The kind of ordinary moments that make a family feel steady. But over time something changed. Not suddenly, not loudly, just quietly. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter, the conversations more careful, as if every word had been measured before it was spoken. And sometimes, just sometimes, I would catch Sophia looking around the house. Not the way someone admires a home, but the way someone evaluates it. As if she were already imagining what it would look like, without me in it. I noticed these things. Of course I did. At my age, you learn to notice what people don't say just as much as what they do. But I didn't ask questions. Because when you love someone, you learn to ignore the small discomforts. You tell yourself they don't matter. You tell yourself everything is still fine. And for a long time, I believed that. By the time I realized something had shifted, it was already too late to trace when it began. Distance doesn't always arrive like an argument. Sometimes it arrives like silence. Daniel's Sunday calls became shorter at first. Then they became optional. Then eventually they stopped altogether. The first time he missed one, I told myself he must be busy. Work had always been demanding for him. Construction deadlines, client meetings, long hours under pressure. I understood all of that. I had spent decades watching his father come home exhausted, carrying the weight of responsibility in his shoulders. So I waited. The second Sunday passed without a call, and I picked up the phone myself. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to sound like I was waiting. The third week he called back. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice distracted, as if I had caught him in the middle of something else. "Sorry, things have just been busy." Busy. Such a simple word. Such a convenient one. "It's all right," I told him gently. "I understand." And I did. Or at least, I tried to. After that, the pattern settled in. Weeks would pass between conversations. When he did call, there was always something in the background. Voices, movement, the faint echo of another life that no longer included me in the same way. Sophia's presence grew louder. Even when she wasn't speaking directly to me, I could hear her in the way Daniel rushed through our conversations. In the way he laughed more carefully. In the way he seemed to choose his words, as if someone might be listening. Their visits changed too. They still came, but not as often and never for long. Where they once stayed for hours, now they stayed just long enough to be polite. An hour. Sometimes less. Sophia would sit on the edge of the couch, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She rarely looked fully relaxed, as though comfort was something she reserved for other places. She would compliment the house occasionally. "It's very classic," she said once, her eyes moving slowly across the living room. "Classic?" I smiled. "Your father-in-law built most of it himself," I told her. She nodded politely. "I can tell." But there was something in her tone I couldn't quite name. Not admiration. Not quite. Something closer to assessment. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed less present each time. He checked his phone more often. Responded to messages mid-conversation. Once while I was speaking, he nodded absently, then asked me to repeat everything because he hadn't been listening. He apologized, of course. He always did. But apologies don't fill silence. They just acknowledge it. One afternoon, I prepared lunch the way I used to when he was younger, grilled sandwiches, tomato soup, the kind of simple meal that used to bring him running into the kitchen. He took a few bites. "It's good, Mom," he said. But he didn't finish it. Sophia barely touched hers at all. "We've been trying to eat lighter," she explained, setting her spoon down carefully. Of course. That made sense. Everything she said always made sense. And yet, something about it still felt like distance. Not rejection. Not directly. Just a quiet pulling away. Like a tide receding, inch by inch, so slowly you almost don't notice the water is gone. Until you're standing there alone, staring at the empty shore. I began to notice the gaps more clearly after that. The pauses. The silences. The things left unsaid. And somewhere, deep down, I started to understand that whatever had changed in my family was not going to change back. The changes didn't come all at once. They came in small, almost harmless ways. The kind you can easily excuse if you're not looking too closely. At first, it was just the way Sophia addressed me. "Margaret," she would say every single time. Never Mom. Not once. Not even by accident. I told myself it was a modern thing. Some people preferred distance. Some people needed time. I had repeated that explanation so often in my head that it began to sound like truth. But names matter. They always have. And every time she said mine, it felt less like recognition, and more like separation. Then came the decisions. Little ones, at first. Holiday dinners were moved from my house to theirs. It was presented as something practical. More space, less effort for me, more convenience for everyone. "It's easier this way," Sophia explained with a small, polite smile. "Easier." I nodded. Of course it was. The first Christmas at their house felt unfamiliar in a way I couldn't quite explain. The decorations were different. The food was different. Even the timing felt rushed, as if the day had been reorganized into something efficient rather than meaningful. I brought my usual dishes anyway. Roasted vegetables. Apple pie. The recipes Daniel grew up with. Sophia thanked me, but the food stayed mostly untouched. "We're trying something lighter this year," she said. I smiled again. I always smiled. After that, I noticed my role in the family becoming smaller. Gradually. Quietly. I was no longer asked what I thought about things. Not about holidays. Not about plans. Not even about Daniel. Instead, I was informed. "We're going to Florida this spring. We've decided to renovate. We might host this year." Always we. Never a question. Never an invitation to be part of the decision. At first, I told myself this was normal. Children grow up. They build their own lives. They make their own choices. That's what I had wanted for Daniel. Independence. Happiness. A future that didn't depend on me. But independence doesn't have to feel like exclusion. And yet, that's exactly what it began to feel like. One evening, they came over for dinner. I had set the table carefully, the way I always did. Cloth napkins, matching plates, everything in its proper place. It was a habit I never quite let go of. Sophia walked in, glanced at the table and paused. "You don't have to do all this, Margaret," she said lightly. It's just dinner. Just dinner. I looked at the table. To me, it wasn't just dinner. It was effort. Care. A way of saying you matter enough for me to try. I enjoy it, I replied softly. She gave a small nod, as if acknowledging something unnecessary. During the meal, Daniel mentioned they were thinking about making some changes to their house. Maybe opening up the kitchen, he said. Modernizing things. Sophia added. People really prefer open spaces now. Cleaner. Less clutter. Her eyes drifted briefly around my dining room as she said it. Not lingering. Just enough. I followed her gaze. The wooden cabinet my husband built. The framed photographs along the wall. The clock that had hung in the same place for decades. Clutter. That's what she saw. Not history. Not memories. Just things. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet awareness. A realization that the life I had built, the home that held everything I loved, did not look the same through her eyes. To her, it wasn't something to cherish. It was something to change. And slowly, piece by piece, she was beginning to change more than just the space around us. She was changing where I stood in it. It started with a conversation that sounded reasonable. That's how these things always begin. Daniel brought it up one afternoon while we were sitting in the living room. The sunlight was coming through the windows at that soft angle it always does in late afternoon, warming the same spot on the carpet where he used to play as a child. He sat across from me, leaning slightly forward, his hands clasped together as if he had rehearsed what he was about to say. Mom, he began carefully, have you ever thought about making things a little easier for yourself? I looked at him. In what way? I asked. He hesitated, just for a second. Then Sophia spoke. She had been standing near the doorway, quiet until that moment, her arms folded loosely as if she had been waiting for the right time to step in. The house is quite large, she said gently, and maintaining it must be a lot for one person. Her voice was calm, thoughtful, concerned. At least, that's how it sounded. I followed her gaze as it moved through the room. The high ceiling, the wide windows, the furniture that had been in the same place for years. It's manageable, I replied. And it was. I had taken care of this house for decades. I knew every corner of it, every small repair it needed before it even became a problem. It wasn't a burden. It was my life. Daniel nodded slowly, but he didn't look convinced. We're just thinking long-term, he said. You know, planning ahead. Planning. Another simple word. Another careful one. Sophia stepped a little closer. There are wonderful communities now, she added. Places where everything is taken care of for you. No stress. No maintenance. Just comfort. Comfort. I almost smiled at that. There is a difference between comfort and belonging. But I didn't say that. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and listened. We're not saying you need to do anything right now, Daniel continued quickly. Just consider it. Consider it. I looked at him. Really looked this time. At the way he avoided holding my gaze for too long. At the way his voice carried a hint of something unfamiliar. Not cruelty. Not even impatience. Just distance. How long have you been thinking about this? I asked quietly. He hesitated. Only for a moment. Just recently, he said. But Sophia didn't answer. She simply watched me. And in that silence, I understood something important. This wasn't recent. This had been discussed, planned, considered, long before it was ever mentioned to me. I see, I said. The room felt different after that. The same walls, the same furniture, the same soft light falling across the floor. And yet, something had shifted. Not in the house. In the space between us. Daniel leaned back slightly, as if relieved the conversation hadn't turned into something difficult. We just want what's best for you, Mom, he said. I nodded. Of course they did. That's what people always say when they're about to rearrange your life without asking. What's best for you? Such a gentle phrase. Such a dangerous one. Sophia gave a small, approving smile. We're only thinking about your future, she added. My future. I let the words settle quietly in my mind, because for the first time, I realized something neither of them had said out loud. When they talked about my future, they weren't imagining me in this house. And suddenly, for the first time in 43 years, my home didn't feel entirely mine anymore. I didn't mean to overhear them. At least, that's what I told myself afterward. But the truth is, when something inside you starts to feel unsettled, you begin to notice things you might have once ignored. You move a little quieter. You listen a little longer. That evening, they thought I had gone upstairs. I had excused myself after dinner, saying I was tired. Sophia had smiled politely, Daniel had nodded, and I walked slowly toward the staircase, making sure my footsteps sounded exactly as they always did. But halfway up, I stopped. There's a small turn in the stairs where the railing casts a shadow against the wall. If you stand there quietly enough, you can hear everything from the living room below. I had stood there many times before, years ago, listening for Daniel when he was a boy, making sure he had come home safely, making sure he was all right. That night, I stood there again. Only this time, I wasn't listening as a mother. I was listening as someone trying to understand what she had become. At first, there was silence. Then Sophia spoke. Her voice was lower now. No sovtnis. No kerfel pelaitnis. We can't keep doing this, she said. Daniel sighed. I know, he replied. I just don't want to rush things. Rush. The word echoed in my mind. She's not going to leave on her own, Sophia continued. You heard her. She thinks everything is manageable. There was a faint clink of glass. Daniel setting something down. She's lived here her whole life, he said. It's not that simple. It is that simple, Sophia replied, sharper this time. This house is too valuable to sit like this. We could renovate it, sell it, or... She paused. And then she said it. Or move my mother in. The air seemed to thin around me. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. That's not what we agreed on, he said. Agreed. Another word that told me more than it should have. Sophia exhaled slowly, as if trying to remain patient. We agreed to think about options, she corrected. And this is an option. She's my mother, Daniel said. And I'm your wife, Sophia replied, without hesitation. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they had said. I stood there, my hand resting lightly against the railing, feeling something inside me settle into place. Not shock. Not even anger. Just clarity. So what are you suggesting? Daniel asked finally. I'm suggesting we stop pretending this is temporary, Sophia said. We need a timeline. A plan. A plan. For me. For what? Daniel pressed. For her to move out, Sophia said. Simple. Direct. Final. I closed my eyes for a moment. 42 years of memories sat quietly beneath me in that house. Every birthday. Every holiday. Every ordinary day that had once felt so full of meaning. And now reduced to a discussion. A timeline. A plan. Daniel spoke again, but his voice sounded different now. Not resistant. Not quite. Just tired. I'll talk to her, he said. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet shift, like a door closing somewhere deep inside your chest. I opened my eyes, turned slowly, and walked the rest of the way upstairs without making a sound, because now for the first time, I understood exactly where I stood. And more importantly, I understood what I needed to do next. The conversation came sooner than I expected. Not rushed. Not emotional. Just inevitable. It happened 3 days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The kind of afternoon that used to mean something, when Daniel would arrive early, linger in the kitchen, ask what I was cooking before he even took off his coat. This time he didn't ask anything. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than usual, as if gathering the right words before stepping inside. Sophia followed behind him, composed as always, her expression unreadable. I had already set the table, not because I expected things to be normal, but because I needed something to hold on to while everything else quietly unraveled. We sat down. For a few minutes, we spoke about nothing. The weather, traffic, a neighbor who had moved away, empty words filling an increasingly heavy silence. Then Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, he said. I looked up. There it was again, that careful tone. The same one he used as a child when he knew he had done something wrong but hoped kindness might soften it. I've been thinking about what we talked about the other day, he continued. Of course you have, I thought. I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate. And? I asked. He glanced briefly at Sophia. Just a second. But it was enough. I think it might be a good idea to start considering some changes, he said. Changes. Such a harmless word. Such a deliberate one. What kind of changes? I asked, though I already knew. Sophia answered this time. Something more suitable for you, she said gently. Somewhere easier. More practical. Practical. I almost smiled. Practical for whom? I asked quietly. The question lingered in the air. Daniel shifted in his seat. Mom, that's not fair, he said. Not fair. I nodded slowly. You're right, I replied. Let's be fair. I looked at both of them. Really looked. At Daniel, my son, who once needed me for everything. At Sophia, the woman who now seemed to understand his life better than I did. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Sophia didn't hesitate. We're not planning anything against you, she said smoothly. We're trying to help you. Help. Another gentle word. Another dangerous one. I see, I said. The room grew quieter. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick more carefully. Daniel leaned forward slightly. We just don't want things to become difficult later, he added. It's better to prepare now. Prepare? For what? I asked. Neither of them answered immediately. And in that silence, the truth settled between us. For me to leave, I said. Daniel's expression tightened. That's not what we're saying, he replied quickly. But he didn't say it wasn't true. Sophia remained still, watching me with that same composed calm. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. I took a slow breath. For a moment, I considered arguing, defending, reminding them of everything this house held. But something inside me had already moved past that. No, I said softly. You don't have to explain. Daniel looked relieved. Sophia gave a small nod. They thought I understood. They thought I was agreeing. They thought this conversation had gone well. And in a way, it had. Because while they believed they had just taken control of the situation, they didn't realize something far more important had just happened. I had stopped trying to belong where I was no longer wanted. And once that happens, everything changes. After that conversation, something inside me grew, very quiet. Not empty. Not broken. Just still. For the first time in years, I stopped explaining myself. Stopped justifying my place in my own home. Stopped trying to make things feel the way they used to. Instead, I watched. I listened. And I began to prepare. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was silent, just as it always was, but this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt useful. I made my coffee slowly, standing by the kitchen window as the light crept across the backyard. The same tree stood there, just beyond the fence, its branches stretching wide, just as they had when Daniel was a boy climbing too high for my comfort. Some things never change. But people do. I took a sip of coffee and let the warmth settle in my chest. Then I turned away from the window and walked down the hallway. There is a room at the end of the hall that no one ever asks about. My husband's office. I hadn't touched it much since he passed. Not because I was afraid to, but because some spaces deserve to remain exactly as they were, at least for a while. But that morning, I opened the door. The air inside was still, faintly carrying the scent of old paper and polished wood. His desk stood exactly where he had left it. The same chair. The same lamp. The same neatly arranged drawers. I ran my fingers lightly across the surface. All right, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Let's begin. The first thing I did was gather the documents. Not just a few. All of them. Property records. Bank statements. Investment files. Legal papers that had been carefully organized over decades. My husband had always been meticulous. Paperwork tells the truth people try to hide, he used to say. At the time, I thought it was just his way of staying organized. Now I understood. I spent hours going through everything. Not rushing. Not hesitating. Just reading. Understanding. Remembering. And slowly, piece by piece, a different kind of picture began to form. Not the one Daniel and Sophia believed they were creating, but one they had never even considered. That afternoon, I made a phone call. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone in the family. To someone they didn't even know I still spoke to. "Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell," I said calmly when he answered. There was a brief pause on the line. Then recognition. "Margaret," he replied. "It's been a long time." "Yes," I said softly. "It has." Mr. Caldwell had been our lawyer for over 30 years. He knew every detail of our finances, every decision my husband had ever made regarding the house, the assets, the future. More importantly, he knew me. "I need to review everything," I continued. "All accounts. All documents. And I'd like to make some changes." There was no surprise in his voice when he answered. "Of course," he said. "When would you like to come in?" "Soon," I replied. "Very soon." That evening, Daniel called. It was unexpected. "Hey, Mom," he said. His tone was lighter than it had been in days. Careful, but hopeful. "I was thinking maybe we could talk again. About everything." I smiled slightly, even though he couldn't see it. "Of course," I said gently. "We will." And we would. Just not in the way he expected. After I hung up, I walked back into the living room. The house looked exactly the same. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Because for the first time, I was no longer reacting to what was happening to me. I was deciding what would happen next. And that is a very different kind of power. That night, after the house had gone completely still, I sat at the kitchen table and began to write. Not quickly. Not emotionally. Carefully. Every word placed exactly where it needed to be. The paper I chose was simple. White. Unlined. The kind we used to keep in the drawer beside the refrigerator for grocery lists and small reminders. It felt appropriate, ordinary, almost forgettable. But what I was about to write would be anything but. I picked up my pen and paused for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. There is something about writing a final letter that changes the way you think. You don't write to explain. You don't write to argue. You write to make things clear. Daniel. I wrote his name first. Not my son. Not anything sentimental. Just Daniel. Because sometimes the truth requires distance. By the time you read this, I will already be gone. I stopped there for a moment. Not because I doubted the words, but because I understood the weight of them. Gone. Such a simple word. And yet it carries so many meanings. I continued. Asterisk, you don't need to worry about me. I am safe. And I am exactly where I have chosen to be. Asterisk. That part was important. Not for him. For me. Because for the first time, this wasn't something happening to me. This was something I had decided. The pen moved steadily across the page. No hesitation. No corrections. I want to thank you for everything you have shown me these past few months. I could almost hear how that would sound when he read it. Confusing. Unexpected. Asterisk, you have made something very clear to me. Not through your words, but through your silence. Asterisk. Silence. The same silence that had slowly replaced our conversations. The same silence that had answered questions I never asked out loud. I leaned back slightly, letting my eyes rest on the words. Then I continued. I heard you. 3 words. Simple. Precise. Enough. There was no need to explain further. No need to describe the staircase. The shadows. The conversation they thought I would never hear. Truth doesn't need decoration. Asterisk, you spoke about timelines. About plans. About what should be done with this house. Asterisk. I paused again. My fingers rested lightly against the paper. You were right about one thing. Another line. Carefully chosen. It is time to make decisions. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second marking the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. Asterisk what you did not understand is this asterisk. I wrote slowly now. Deliberately. This house was never just a place to live. I looked around the room as I wrote. The table. The walls. The quiet. And it was never something you were entitled to. The words didn't feel harsh. They felt accurate. I continued writing, each sentence more certain than the last. Not emotional. Not angry. Just clear. I have already taken care of everything that needed to be taken care of. That line would matter later. Asterisk every document. Every account. Every decision. Asterisk. I placed the pen down for a moment and folded my hands together. There was no trembling. No doubt. Only a calm certainty I hadn't felt in years. Then I picked up the pen again and wrote the final lines. By the time you understand what I have done, it will no longer be something you can change. I let the ink settle into the paper. Then beneath it I signed my name. Not as Mom. Not with affection. Just Margaret Hale. I folded the letter once. Carefully. Neatly. And placed it in the center of the kitchen table. Exactly where they would see it. Then I turned off the light. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. I left before the sun came up. Not because I needed to hide, but because I wanted to leave quietly. There is a difference. The house was still dark when I walked through it one last time. No lights. No noise. Just the soft echo of my own footsteps against the floors that had carried me through a lifetime. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. I moved slowly from room to room, letting my eyes rest on the things that had once defined my life. The living room first. The chair where my husband used to sit every evening. Reading the newspaper he insisted on holding even when the print had grown too small. The lamp beside it still tilted slightly to the left. Something he always meant to fix but never did. I reached out and straightened it. Just once. Then I let it go. The hallway. Photographs lined the walls. Years of moments frozen in time. Daniel as a child, missing his front teeth, grinning proudly at something only he understood. Daniel at graduation, standing tall, already looking like the man he would become. Daniel on his wedding day. Sophia beside him, radiant, composed, already distant in a way I hadn't recognized back then. I paused there for a moment. Not out of sadness. Just acknowledgement. Then I continued. The kitchen was last. It had always been the heart of the house. Where mornings began. Where conversations unfolded. Where life, in all its ordinary ways, quietly existed. The letter sat exactly where I had left it. Centered. Waiting. I didn't touch it. There was nothing left to adjust. I placed my keys beside it. Not tossed. Not abandoned. Placed. Deliberately. Because even leaving can be done with care. For a moment, I stood there in the stillness. Listening. Not for voices. Not for footsteps. Just for that familiar feeling that had once filled this space. It wasn't there anymore. And that was all right. I picked up my bag. It was smaller than I expected. Funny, the things you realize you don't need when you finally decide to leave. The front door opened with the same soft creak it had made for decades. I stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the quiet promise of early morning. The sky hadn't fully decided on its color yet, caught somewhere between night and day. I closed the door behind me. Gently. No hesitation. No second thoughts. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I already knew what was behind me. And for the first time, I was more interested in what was ahead. The car was waiting at the end of the driveway. Engine running. On time. Reliable. Some things still were. I opened the door, settled into the seat, and placed my bag beside me. Ready? The driver asked. I nodded. Yes, I said calmly. As the car began to move, the house slowly disappeared from view. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just gradually. Like everything else had. Inside there was no regret. No fear. No uncertainty. Only a quiet, steady sense of clarity. Because this wasn't an escape. It wasn't loss. It wasn't even an ending. It was a decision. And by the time they walked into that kitchen, and saw the letter waiting for them on the table. Everything that mattered would already be out of their reach. Daniel found the letter before he noticed anything else. He had used his key out of habit, pushing the front door open with the same casual familiarity he had carried his entire life. For a brief moment, everything must have felt normal. The quiet house, the still air, the faint scent of coffee that always lingered in the kitchen. "Mom," he called out. No answer. Sophia stepped in behind him, her heels clicking softly against the floor as her eyes moved quickly through the room. Not searching, but scanning. Daniel walked toward the kitchen. And then he stopped. The letter was exactly where I had left it. Centered on the table. Impossible to miss. "What's this?" he muttered, already reaching for it. Sophia moved closer, her posture sharpening slightly, the calm mask she always wore tightening just enough to reveal curiosity beneath it. Daniel unfolded the paper. At first, his expression didn't change. His eyes moved slowly across the first few lines, reading silently. Then something shifted. A pause. A flicker of confusion. He read the opening again, more carefully this time. "By the time you read this, I will already be gone." Sophia leaned in slightly. "What does it say?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He kept reading. His grip on the paper tightened almost imperceptibly. "She left," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "She says she's gone." Sophia's expression remained composed, but her eyes sharpened. "Gone where?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "It doesn't say." But he kept reading. And with every line, the air in that room began to change. "I want to thank you for everything you have shown me." Daniel frowned. "That doesn't make sense," he said under his breath. Sophia didn't respond. She was watching his face now, not the letter. Watching the way his expression slowly unraveled. Asterisk, "You have made something very clear to me. Not through your words, but through your silence." Asterisk. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced up briefly, then back down again. She's talking about us," he said. Sophia crossed her arms. "Well, obviously," she replied coolly. "Just keep reading." Then he reached the line. "I heard you." 3 words. Nothing more. Daniel froze. For a moment he didn't move at all. "What?" Sophia asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at the paper. "Then read it again." "I heard you." His voice trailed off. Slowly he looked up. At Sophia. And for the first time since they had walked into that house, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Realization. "What does that mean?" Sophia asked, her tone sharpening slightly. Daniel swallowed. "I think," he hesitated. "I think she heard us. That night." The room went very still. Sophia's expression didn't collapse. But it changed. Subtly. Carefully. Daniel looked back down and continued reading. And now, there was no confusion left. Only understanding. Asterisk, "You spoke about timelines. About plans." Asterisk. His hands trembled slightly. Not from weakness. From recognition. "She knew," he said quietly. Sophia didn't speak. Then came the next lines. "I have already taken care of everything that needed to be taken care of." Daniel's eyes moved faster now. More urgently. "What does that mean?" he said. This time, there was something closer to panic beneath his voice. Sophia stepped forward. "Let me see," she said, reaching for the letter. But Daniel didn't let go. Not immediately. Because something in him already understood. Before he even finished reading. That whatever was written on that page had already changed everything. Daniel didn't finish the letter all at once. He read it in pieces. Because the truth, when it finally arrives, is rarely something you can take in all at once. Asterisk, every document. Every account. Every decision. Asterisk. The words sat there, quiet and final. Daniel's eyes moved over them again, slower this time. "What did she do?" he asked, his voice tight. Sophia didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer now, no longer pretending calm indifference. Her eyes scanned the page quickly, sharply, searching, calculating. "Keep reading," she said. Daniel swallowed and continued. "By the time you understand what I have done, it will no longer be something you can change. His hand tightened around the paper. A slow, creeping unease filled the room. That doesn't mean anything, Sophia said quickly. She's just being dramatic. But her voice had lost its smooth certainty. Daniel reached the final paragraph. And this time, he read it out loud. The house you were so eager to plan around no longer belongs to you in any way. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Sophia blinked. What? She said. Daniel didn't respond. He kept reading. Asterisk, it has been transferred, legally and permanently, according to decisions I made long before you ever spoke of timelines. Asterisk. The word echoed in the air. Timelines. The same word they had used. The same word she had heard. That's not possible, Sophia said, her voice sharper now. You can't just transfer property without. She stopped, because suddenly she wasn't sure. Daniel's eyes moved faster now, more desperate. The financial accounts you were so concerned about have also been resolved. His breathing changed. Subtle, but noticeable. To where? He muttered. Sophia grabbed the edge of the table. What does that mean, Daniel? He didn't answer, because he was already reading the next line. The majority of my estate has been donated, as I see fit, to causes that understand the value of what they are given. Sophia's composure broke. Donated, she snapped. Donated to what? Daniel's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She gave it away. The room seemed smaller now, tighter, as if the walls themselves had moved closer. There has to be something left, Sophia said quickly. She wouldn't just. But she didn't finish, because Daniel had reached the last part. What remains was never yours to begin with. That was it. No explicación. No apology. No room for interpretation. Daniel lowered the paper slowly. His hands were no longer steady. Sophia stepped back. For the first time since entering that house, she looked uncertain. Not confused. Not emotional. Just uncertain. This doesn't make sense, she said. She can't just disappear, Anne. She didn't disappear, Daniel said quietly. Sophia looked at him. She left, he continued. On purpose. The distinction mattered. More than either of them wanted to admit. Sophia shook her head. We can fix this, she said quickly. We just need to talk to a lawyer, find out what she actually did. Daniel didn't move. Didn't respond. Because deep down, he already knew. This wasn't something she had done impulsively. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't reversible. This was planned. Carefully. Quietly. Completely. And by the time they had realized it, they weren't part of the plan anymore. The letter slipped slightly in his hand. And in that moment, for the first time, Daniel understood something that came far too late. They hadn't lost control of the situation. They had never had it to begin with. Daniel didn't try to stop her. Not when Sophia grabbed her phone. Not when she started pacing across the kitchen, already dialing numbers, already speaking in that sharp, controlled tone she used when she believed things could still be managed. We need to verify everything, she said. This could be contested. There has to be a way to. Daniel wasn't listening anymore. He was still standing by the table. Still holding the letter. Still staring at the space where my signature rested at the bottom of the page. Margaret Hale. For a long moment he didn't move, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't reacting. He was remembering. The house felt different now. Not empty. Not yet. But unfamiliar. As if something essential had already been removed, leaving behind only structure. Walls. Furniture. Objects without meaning. He looked around slowly. At the kitchen. The table. The chair I used to sit in every morning. And suddenly, small details began to return to him. Things he hadn't noticed before. The way I always set the table. Even when no one was coming. The way I kept the house exactly the same, not because I couldn't change it, but because it already meant something. The way I never argued. Never raised my voice. Never forced him to choose. He swallowed. Hard. In the background, Sophia was still talking. We'll call Mr. Reynolds, he'll know what to do. And if she transferred assets recently, there might be a window to. There isn't. Daniel's voice cut through the room. Quiet. But final. Sophia stopped. Turned toward him. What do you mean there isn't? She asked. Daniel looked at her. Really looked this time. And something in his expression had changed. Not anger. Not even blame. Just clarity. She planned this, he said. Sophia frowned. That doesn't mean it's legal. It is, he interrupted. She blinked. Caught off guard. She wouldn't have done it otherwise, Daniel continued. Not like this. Not without knowing exactly what she was doing. The words settled heavily between them. Because deep down, they both knew he was right. Sophia's composure began to crack. Just slightly. We can still find her, she said. We can talk to her, explain things. Explain what? Daniel asked. The question hung in the air. Sharp. Unavoidable. That we didn't mean it, he continued. That it was just practical? Sophia didn't answer. Because for the first time, those words didn't sound reasonable anymore. They sounded small. Daniel looked back down at the letter. At the final lines. At the quiet certainty behind them. I left because I finally knew my worth. He exhaled slowly. Outside, the light had changed. Morning had fully arrived. But inside the house, something had ended. Sophia stepped back, her mind still searching for solutions, for angles, for anything that could be undone. But there was nothing left to undo. Because this had never been about money, or the house, or control. It had been about something much simpler, something they hadn't seen, until it was gone. Respect. Daniel folded the letter carefully, not out of habit, not out of routine, but because it felt like the only thing left he could do correctly. She's not coming back, he said quietly. And this time, even Sophia didn't argue. Somewhere far from that house, I sat by a window overlooking a quiet stretch of water, a cup of coffee warm in my hands. The morning was calm, uncomplicated, meaning. For the first time in years, there was no waiting, no explaining, no wondering where I belonged. Because I already knew. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is leave before they realize what they've lost.